The second major conversation in Franny and Zooey is between Bessie, the mother, and Zoe. Zoe is in the bathtub having just read a letter from his eldest living brother, Buddy, and Bessie has come into the bathroom with him in the tub and the curtain drawn. The curtain, obviously, a shout out to what this novel is, which is a mini play, a 3-act play, and now one of our main actors is behind the curtain, and Bessie comes in under the pretext of giving him a gift. We're disappointed to learn that even though the package is fancy, the gift is actually just a new brand of toothpaste, because Zoe uses the old powdery brand of toothpaste, and it's going to make the enamel lose the enamel from his teeth. And he says, "Who says the old toothpaste is going to make me lose the enamel on my teeth?" And so that sets the tone of the conversation. That as far as Zoe's part, it's going to be completely cheeky, and that's how he deals with his sister having a breakdown or any other hard parts of life. He is cheeky toward his mom. Well, the first thing she lays into is the fact that she's frustrated that Buddy lives all by himself in a rural setting, and he's in a cabin with no electricity, and he doesn't have a phone there, but he does have a phone here in Manhattan. Well, we just finished reading a letter with Zoe from Buddy in the tub right before she barged in, and it's a 4-year-old letter, and he says in the letter that his mom is frustrated that he doesn't have a phone. So presumably, between that time and this, she's been complaining about the phone for 4 years. When she's done complaining about Buddy not having a phone in his cabin, but he does have one there in Manhattan where it's completely useless to anyone, we think. The next thing she complains about is her husband and how he can't engage in the suffering. So Buddy can't be gotten a hold of. And in a way, Dad, he can't be gotten a hold of either. He lives there, but he simply can't engage. And she suspects that his problem is that he's just reverted entirely to the past. He's had his wisest, kindest, nicest son commit suicide, and he has his only light-hearted son has been killed in World War II. And so rather than be able to deal with that, he has reverted to just acting like it's the past. And she says she even suspects that he wants to tune the radio, and expect to hear his kids all on It's a Wise Child again. So he simply won't engage, and by Bessie's point of view, he thinks that what his daughter needs is a tangerine. So he's not really engaged either. So both Buddy and Dad are really no help in the whole Franny matter, or any other matter for that. Well, when she's not after her oldest living son or her husband, the next thing she wants to do is to blame Franny herself and her lack of diet, and how can she expect to be a healthy person if she's not eating healthy food. And so I think what Salinger is doing here is showing that Les and Bessie, the parents of all these geniuses, of all these wise children, they're at a very normal intelligence level, and when they want to bring chicken soup or tangerines to their daughter, they stand for how a normal person would act. These offerings are a tangible sign that we love you and we're trying to do something for you. And so it's really kind of beautiful and nice that she at least thinks, what can I do for my daughter? And one thing I can do for my daughter is not have her eat junk food, but rather have something nice. So I think what Salinger's doing there is saying that this is what a normal, non-genius, non-tormented person would do, is bring chicken soup or a tangerine to their daughter rather than feed them cheeseburgers and cigarettes. So after she's talked about her son, her husband, and Franny's diet, Salinger gives us a little 2.5-page backstory about who this woman is, and he calls her a true beauty who still has the legs of a dancer, and she wears this Japanese kimono, and it has pockets all over, and he spends 3/4 of a page describing all of the items in her pockets. And what we really start to see is, though she's being mocked, she shares a lot of similarity with, maybe even unbeknownst to Franny, but Franny shows a lot of similarities to her mother in that in Franny's conversation in part 1 with Lane, she looks at Lane as someone who has education, and some of the section men and some of the most of the professors at her college, as you have this education, you have this knowledge, you have poetry, you have drama, you have acting, but it doesn't lead to anything great or beautiful, profound. It doesn't really do anything good in your life. And here we see that Bessie is basically saying the exact same thing to Zooey. You guys were happy children, but where has all this learning got you? And so there's a parallelism in that the two lady glasses really have the same opinion. Education is fine, but if it doesn't lead toward wisdom, and if it's not practical, and it doesn't lead to joy and happiness and beauty and love, then really what was the point of it in the first place? She asked Zooey if they should contact his Roman Catholic priest who's down in Ecuador, brother. I don't know if it's Waker or if you would pronounce that Walker. And he says, no, you're way off. This isn't a Catholic theological issue. This is something he describes as non-sectarian. In other words, it's not a strictly theological bent. Some might call it a theological bent, but not of the specific Catholic variety. Then she says, well, what about therapy? I mean, you can't even reach Buddy on the phone. Dad is offering tangerines. I'm offering chicken soup instead of hamburgers. You're not even talking to her according to my desires. Walker won't be helpful with his strictly priestly background. And so what about therapy? And she cannot even get those words out of her mouth before Zooey rips him apart. In that, he says it would have to be the most particular, humble, gracious type of therapist, or it would never work for Franny. And furthermore, look at what therapy did for Seymour. I guess we're supposed to read into that Seymour had more therapy, more psychiatry than anyone, and he ended up committing suicide. So do you really want to try that path again with your youngest, with your baby girl? You've already lost Seymour to that. Then he says, you're way off. And she leaves the bathroom, and 5 minutes later, she comes in. And I'm sure there's some significance to the fact that as she comes in, he's looking at her through a mirror. There's no more curtain. And now there's a chance for more truth and more honesty. And now we get an interesting thing here in Franny and Zooey is both of them give a book report about the Pilgrim book that she's reading. One discrepancy is where the book is from. For some reason, Franny lied to Lane about the origins of the book. My guess would be that she lied to Lane about the origins of the book because Lane knows enough about her family to know that maybe you don't want to follow exactly all of Seymour's footsteps is probably how Lane would look at it. So she tells a lie and says she checked it out from the library and keeps forgetting to return it. Zooey knows the truth and Bessie does not. Zooey knows the truth that this is straight out of the bookshelf in the childhood bedroom of Seymour and Buddy. And so that book has been in this apartment as long as those boys have lived there, which is decades now. And so he gets a chance to explain the book to his mother in very much the same terms as Franny explained the book to Lane in part 1. So let's hear now Zooey's rendition of what the two books are all about. Both books are about a Russian peasant around the turn of the century, he said in what was, for his implacably matter-of-fact voice, a rather narrative tone. He's a very simple, very sweet little guy with a withered arm, which of course makes him a natural for Franny with that billowy home heart of hers. He pivoted around, picked up his cigarette from the frosted glass ledge, dragged on it, and then began to file his nails. In the beginning, the little peasant tells you, he had a wife and a farm, but he had a loony brother who burned down the farm, and then later I think the wife just died. Anyway, he starts on the pilgrimage, and he has a problem. He's been reading the Bible all his life, and he wants to know what it means when it says in Thessalonians, pray without ceasing. That one line keeps haunting him. Zooey reached for his cigarette again, dragged on it, and then said, there's another similar line in Timothy. I will, therefore, that men pray everywhere. And Christ himself, as a matter of fact, says, men ought always to pray and not to faint. So anyway, he begins his pilgrimage to find a teacher, he said, someone who can teach him how to pray incessantly and why. He walks and he walks and he walks from one church and shrine to another, talking to this priest and that, till finally he meets a simple old monk who apparently knows what it's all about. The old monk tells him that the one prayer acceptable to God at all times and desired by God is the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Actually, the whole prayer is, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a miserable sinner. But none of the adepts in either of the pilgrim books put any emphasis, thank God, on the miserable sinner part. Anyway, the old monk explains to him what will happen if the prayer is said incessantly. He gives him some practice sessions with it and sends him home. And to make a long story short, after a while, the little pilgrim becomes proficient with the prayer. He masters it. He's overjoyed with his new spiritual life, and he goes on hiking all over Russia through dense forests, through towns, villages, and so on, saying his prayer as he goes along and telling everyone he happens to meet how to say it too. The aim, a little further down, the aim of both little books, if you're interested, he said, is supposedly to wake everybody up to the need and benefits of saying the Jesus prayer incessantly. Enlightenment's supposed to come with the prayer, not before it. The idea really is that sooner or later, completely on its own, the prayer moves from the lips and the head down to a center in the heart and becomes an automatic function in the person, right along with the heartbeat. And then after a time, once the prayer is automatic in the heart, the person is supposed to enter into the so-called reality of things. So you see what both Franny and Zooey are after and why they're both attracted to and familiar with this book. And that is, they want the opposite of phoniness, they want ultimate reality. And they want the opposite of pride and narcissism, which is attaching yourself to something bigger and greater. And what better way to do that than to get your eyes and your thoughts off yourself and to the divine. And so it's interesting that of all the parts of the book that both Franny and Zooey describe the way of the pilgrim for 2.5, 3, 4 pages each, and they have an almost identical retelling of the plot. And so that's the greatest repetition in the book, and so that must be quite serious. So this second act closes with a plea from Bessie to Zooey to please talk with Franny. And he says, listen, I tried for 2 hours last night. Also, she's not in the mood for it. And number 3, I don't have anything profound to say to her. And so probably that's why he's in the bathtub before she barges in, rereading, studying Buddy's letter to him from 4 years ago to try to refresh that memory of his and their, Franny and Zoe's both, religious education under Buddy and Zooey. That's probably why he's rereading the letter, because he's trying to get some nuggets from what Buddy probably was telling him when he was having his own existential crisis about the same thing, about acting in beauty that Franny is having right now. And so she begs him to give it another shot, and he says to his mom, Zooey says to Bessie, listen, the two of us are freaks. They ruined us. They think that this ideal is to be with God before he said, let there be light. But we were too young. We're too early. It's too much that they've saddled us with. Of course, we're going to have a breakdown. And so he tries to explain to his mom what psychological torture going on a spiritual, religious path it was at too young of an age, to have the intellectual ability to answer, to find answers, to understand deep things, but probably not the life experience or the age or the wisdom to know how to live out those things. And so they're still 20 and 25 years old. And so even now they aren't old enough to have this all figured out, which is why Franny's having this existential crisis. And finally, Bessie is no intellectual slouch. She may be an everyman, but she says, I do know this. You're just like Buddy was at your age. And the problem with you is that you write everyone off and you're too severe with people. Now, this is interesting because it both looks back and it looks forward. This is exactly what Lane said to Franny when they were sitting at the booth there in Sickler's. He says, you really think you're a genius? Do you really think you're wiser than all these critics? If all these critics say that a play is good, does it ever cross your mind that the play might actually be good? And you're way too hard on people. You're way too hard on these professors. Do they all have to have wavy hair? Do they all have to be these mystical religious types before you'll throw them any respect? And then in our third act, I don't think it's a spoiler to tell you that this is what Zooey is going to say to Franny about her, that she makes all these things personal where they shouldn't be personal. I think it really gets to the main point in the climax of the book. The last few words on the last page of the book is he's going to say something similar to Franny here and say what Bessie is saying to him now, which is, you're just way too hard on people. You're severe in your judgment of other people, and you can't be done with people that in that way. And so the second act closes with us wondering if Zooey is going to talk to Franny about her crisis or whether he's going to go downtown and ignore the whole thing. And so that brings the second act to a close. And now the third act will be Franny talking to Zooey. And that's really in two different pieces. And the second piece of that conversation is done in a really interesting and I think in a symbolic way.